Welcome to Older Militarist Radio TV, and we're lifelong Catholics. What we do is all for free, and for our love of Jesus Christ, and for our Holy Mother, the Church, and we'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Today we're going to do the biography of a great Catholic hero, investigator, David Anthony Yallop. Welcome, Brother Alexis, to the show.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Ordo Militaris Radio TV. And as I often say, it's a pleasure and an honor because you on this channel do something that no Catholic news radio on the net does. You talk about all the problems in the world within the light of Christ's face, and you don't stay away from any topic. You're always touching that third rail or fourth rail. This one, I think, is going to be the fifth rail. Today, we're going to talk about arguably one of the most important Catholic authors of the last century, last 100 years, that is. His life spanned both centuries, which you should have heard about, and every Catholic priest should have told you about, because his two books about the church were not only explosive, they were fundamental requests for transparency at the highest levels about the most pressing issues of the day. And he caught so many people in so many lies that if we continue to ignore that, we're living in an alternate reality. And when you hear our brief introductory show about his life today, at the end, you're going to want to run off to the priest of your parish or your chapel or your Catholic prof at the university and say, why didn't you ever tell me about David A. Yallop? And David A. Yallop is not who you might have been told he is. He is not some anti-Catholic hack that writes novels about the Vatican because he hates the Catholic faith and wants to smear people. Not at all. He's a totally different person. So today we'll get to know who David A. Yallop is. May his name remain in benediction and may he rest in peace. One of the great Catholic crusaders of our age who dared to ask questions and risked himself to find the answers and fought for the truth. So, First of all, where and when was David Yallop born?
Okay, so he was born in South London on January 27, 1937. His father George left him and his mother Una Stanton when David was only 18 months old. His mother worked at different office jobs to keep them afloat.
Okay, now is Yallop an Irish name, an English name, a Welsh name, a Dutch name? Do we know anything about his background?
Yeah. It's English.
Okay. Now, was his mother Catholic, his father Catholic, or did he become a Catholic?
It biography at the New York Times doesn't say, but he left high school at age 15 and took a low-level job at a newspaper for 2 years of compulsory military service in the Royal Air Force. When he got out, he worked odd jobs, eventually landing at the television station, where he became a floor manager and studio director before he started writing. He married Anne Rutherford in 1977. In addition to her, he is survived by two daughters, Kim and Lynn Yallop, from an earlier marriage, which ended in divorce. A daughter, Lucy Yallop, and a son, Fletcher, from his second marriage, 6 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren.
Okay. So he's a self-made man, journalist his whole career. Now, what has made Yallop famous?
Yeah, so it is book that he wrote, In God's Name, an investigation into the murder of Pope John Paul I.
And when you said it made him when you say it made him famous, how many millions of copies did this book sell?
6 million.
Okay, and do we know in how many languages it's been translated?
That we don't know.
Many things. But before writing this book about the death of John Paul I, which, if you were alive in those days, as I was in college, nearly in college. No, not quite in college yet, but high school. It was a sensation. Okay, but before he wrote that book, which is like a murder investigation, had he already written books, or what were all the books he wrote to show that he just didn't come out of nowhere and start a crime investigation book?
Yeah. His other books were to encourage the others about the Craig Bentley murder case, The Day the Laughter Stopped, a biography of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, Beyond Reasonable Doubt, the conviction of New Zealand farmer Arthur Thomas for the later pardon for the murder of Harvey and Jenny Grew, Deliver Us from Evil about the Yorkshire Ripper, then In God's Name, Investigation into Pope John Paul I, To the Ends of the Earth about the capture of Carlos the Jackal, How They Stole the Game about the corruption in soccer, Unholy Alliance about the international drug trade and the resultant political corruption, The Power and Glory Inside the Dark Heart of Pope John Paul II's Vatican, and about the papacy of John Paul II, Beyond Belief, yeah,
No, keep going.
about the sexual abuse allegations in the Catholic Church, and the one that is not found anywhere, Rat Lions, about how the Nazis after World War II escaped with the help of the Vatican.
Okay, and if you know where a copy of that book can be found, let AJ know. He'd like to have a copy because it's been wiped out of all search engines and bookstores. It's like it never existed. So that book probably has some juicy things in it. So you can see Yallop was an investigative reporter. He was someone who was not trained in forensics or in policing. He had worked in media, and he just ran face to face with cases in which the evidence convicting a person did not seem substantial. There seemed something wrong with it. And he describes himself in his books as a agnostic Catholic, whatever that means. I think he means he was raised Catholic, but he didn't practice the faith. He put his Christian faith into practice, like our Lord says in the parable. The Jew going down to Jericho, finding the Samaritan going down to Jericho, finding the Jew that's beaten up on the side of the road. He just didn't walk by. He stopped and did what he could to help him. And he was the same kind of man with his pen, with his mind. He looked at the facts, and when he saw they weren't right, he said, this isn't right. And he just didn't leave it there with a tweet, a note. There wasn't even social media back then. He dedicated years of his life investigating, traveling, interviewing, recording, transcribing, going to archives to dig up the evidence to determine who was guilty. Is this guy really guilty? And he got that New Zealand farmer off. He helped convict the Yorkshire Ripper, or his books led to many convictions and many sentences being absolved. So he was a man of eminent justice and charity, because no one was paying him to do this, although he did sell books about it, and he wrote books about it. So his books are not fiction, is the first thing. They are not fantasy. They're forensic investigations done perhaps in written in a popular style. And since he wasn't a journalist, so to speak, a professional, people freely spoke to him in ways that they wouldn't speak. Okay. So this is entirely contrary to everything I have heard about David Yallop. From the first moment I heard this name in minor seminary, and every clergy person who's heard his name that I've asked in my entire life has an entirely different narrative. He's a ridiculous writer of fantasies, out to make money and hack and say bad things about the church. His books are totally fiction, with wild accusations. Pay no attention, which is an accusation AJ and I often get about our shows, even though we cite facts, authors, pages, and documents. And this is the weak argument of a corrupt class that knows they're guilty and has no evidence to prove their truth, but are so arrogant they don't even want to confront the data set, as Ann Barnhart is apt to say. I actually quoted Ann Barnhart, can you imagine? So how did you hear about David Yallop, AJ, and which of his books do you have?
Yeah, so when we were preparing to do on show, are the Cardinals actually elected how they're supposed to be? Or are they actually intelligence agents? And I was doing research from our book that we got on Operation Gladio, and it mentions David Yallop's book in God's Name on Cardinal Cody.
Now, Williams is a professional journalist, and that's an excellent book where he investigates with the Vatican. And Williams is, or was raised, a devout practicing Catholic. In the beginning of the book, he even talks, in one of his other books, he talks about how the whole faith was destroyed by this ruling class we have in the now. What does Williams, a professional journalist, say about Yallop? Does he regard him as a writer of fiction or as someone who's a reliable source?
Very, very reliable. He uses Yallop in a lot of his pages to help tie up the knots and everything.
And this is because Yallop, when he wrote books about the Vatican, he actually went to Rome, to cafes, to saunas, to houses of prostitution, to the police. He listened to everyone, and Italians are very speakative. Very talkative. Excuse me, I've been in Italy too long. And so, yes, this because he didn't, hypothesize something. He actually went out and heard what people said. After writing his books, did he become wealthy? Did he become famous? Did he buy a mansion? What did he do in life?
Shortly after the last new edition in this book, In God's Name, which was released in 2007, that all of a sudden his memory started to go. They said he contracted Alzheimer's, but in 2007, his memory was still sharp and wit enough to do the closing remarks on where he states all the questionnaires that he was asked about people he spoke to and met with, on all the people that named in this book. I was like, if his mind was still that sharp in 2007, then he slowly gets Alzheimer's and then croaks about a year later. I'm thinking they wanted him to lose his memory. Then to
Yes, what he writes in this book is really pointed, and we'll close our show with that comment, so you can get the tenor of what kind of a man he was, what kind of a fighter he was, his love for the truth, his zeal for justice, and regardless of what he claimed his religion was, a man who loved the Catholic Church more than most Catholics. Because even if he was not a Catholic, no Catholic has spent as much time trying to bring justice to the church as this man, in an honest, upright way of doing investigation on noteworthy facts. And you might not like his conclusions. His conclusions might ruffle people's feathers. It might seem outlandish, the things he discovered. But well, now, AJ, I'll ask you to read what he says in his second edition of this book. And then you can tell us about the series, the two series you're going to do about Yallop's books on Ordo Militaris Radio TV.
Yeah. Okay. The lies about the life and death of the smiling Pope began on the day his body was discovered. They have continued down the years to the present day. In June 1985, when the British paperback edition was first published, I decided to make the Vatican task childishly simple. If the Vatican can prove me wrong on just two simple questions of fact, if they can prove that my account of who found the dead body of Albino Luciani is incorrect, and can prove that my account of the papers he was holding in his hands is incorrect, then I will donate every penny of my royalties from the sales of this book to cancer research. The Vatican account of who found the body was their first lie. The papers that Albino Luciani was clutching were the smoking gun. In the light of the Vatican's initial statements that this book was infamous rubbish and absurd fantasies, the Vatican should have been able to demonstrate how incorrect my evidence and conclusions were within hours of reading my offer. That challenge was the subject of worldwide media comments. Nearly 22 years later, I am still waiting for the Vatican to respond. In the light of subsequent revelations, the continuing failure within the Vatican City State to take up the challenge was a wise decision. Nothing has come to light from any quarter since 1984 to cause me to alter the conclusions I had arrived during the research and writing of this book. Indeed, the additional evidence that has come to hand, which is examined in the postscript to this edition, further confirms those original conclusions. David A. Yallop, January 27th, 2007.
Okay, so 22 years he waited and never got a response to very easy facts, because the Vatican could just ask the people who found the documents in his hand and found John Paul II first dead in bed to merely go to a Vatican notary and swear an affidavit. It would take 15 minutes. And in 22 years, they never asked the witnesses to sign something under oath. The only reason that could be is that no one could swear it was other than what was said in the book, and that no one would perjure themselves, because then they would become an accomplice after the fact in murder and the assassination of a head of state. And the Vatican for 22 years, nearly entire this time was run by John Paul II, and Benedict XVI, the first 3 or 4 years of his pontificate. So this is quite a challenge. It's quite generous of him, the kind of a challenge. It's very gentlemanly. It's very polite. It is not argumentative. He could have made a whole long list of things. When you see a challenge that simple, you see this is an honest man. So he's taken the moral high ground, and this should recommend his book to you, and should recommend him as an author to you, because this is not a man who hates the church. This is a man who loves truth. And so, AJ, what do the viewers of Ordo Militaris Radio TV have to expect in the coming weeks? What kind of gems are you going to throw at them?
First one is going to be the crimes of Bernardino Nogara. Thanks to all the bankers he wrote, and we have over 30 pages in this book to do a better and more detailed show on Pius XII and Bernardino Nogara, what the Vatican actually owned, and how much they actually have.
So for those who don't know, Bernardino Nogara was the man charged with investing the money that Mussolini gave to Pius XI to seal the Lateran Pact, which was $1 billion lira in cash and $1 billion lira in state bonds. What became of that money? We'll hear about in that show in Nogara. And this is very important because if you don't understand the finances of the Vatican, you will not understand the foreign policy of the Vatican, and you won't understand why popes did and did not do certain things from 1929 to the present in the last centuries, 97 years. And this is going to be a very interesting show. And if you don't have strong faith, don't watch this show. But if you want to have a realistic view of your Catholic faith and understand how bad it is and why hanging on the tailcoats of your favorite cardinal like Sarah Burke is not going to solve the problem, you want to listen to this show. This is a show that the Sedes should have done, the Tradies should have done, the Conservatives should have done, the Liberals should have done, and no one has done. Not to attack the church, but to clean out the Vatican and save the church from a corrupt cabal that's taken over our church. And this explains also, explaining Vatican II better than and more eloquently than anything. Because as the old saying goes, follow the money. And after that program, what programs do you intend to do, AJ?
Oh, we're going to do a real deep dive into John Paul II. We have his book on John Paul II coming, and we'll also use what's in here after his conclave, how they celebrated it by knocking off a judge. And we'll also talk about the Cardinals, a little bit of John Paul I, and get into some other details that the Tradies don't want you to know about Archbishop Lefebvre.
Okay, so AJ is going to drop names. He's going to give you a very detailed exposition of modern Vatican history, a topic studied nowhere and no one talks about in the church. You're not going to hear this from the pulpit. You're not going to hear this in confessional. You won't hear this at a Catholic university. And you won't read this in any Catholic-controlled opposition publication whatsoever. They won't even talk about this. Or they'll rehash it to divert you from what's really going on. So if you don't have the time to read those books or buy the books, watch the shows on AJ's channel.
And we're going to be doing another set of shows also from Dr. Paul L. Williams. He did another book in 2017 on the church. That one's going to be a lot more rough to do because we're going to be talking about all the details they won't tell you about how the church is involved in human trafficking, in the abuse of orphans.
Okay, not the church, but corrupt clerics in the church. Okay, because and this will give you a good picture of what needs to be done in church reform and who to trust and who not to trust. And this will also explain why the clergy reacted the way they did during the pandemic. You'll see that it wasn't something unusual. That was a big warning sign that something's really wrong in Catholic clergy and throughout the world. Okay, thank you, AJ, for having me on this introductory show about David Yallop. I am just dying to hear the next programs and to share with you in the production. And so stay tuned to Ordo Militaris Radio TV. And if you like the programs, the unique programs, the very informative programs you get only on Ordo Militaris Radio TV, consider donating to the Studio Fund. We recently had a donation of €1,000 to the Studio Fund. That's wonderful. AJ has now about 3,200 of his $200,000 goal, and he's spent 2 years. So let's help the fund grow so that AJ is still alive when it reaches his goal, because it's going very slow. And he puts out higher quality programs than any of the other talking heads who just harangue you about little details in the news and never really tell you what's going on, who's doing what. And so I encourage you to be generous and send a generous donation to Ordo Militaris Radio TV's Studio Fund, which is a 501c3 fund, because it will go to the building of a studio that will be owned by a nonprofit in Kansas, where AJ will have all the equipment to produce the program in a professional manner. So please be generous.
This is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Day is full.
Day is full.